For the residents of Hyde, Greater Manchester, Dr. Harold Shipman was a pillar of community, a trusted, caring family physician. To his patients, many of whom had been with him for decades, he was simply Fred, a man who made house calls, who was always there, and whose calm demeanor was a comfort in times of sickness and death. But beneath that gentle exterior lay a darkness so profound, it would ultimately rewrite the history of serial murder. The story of Harold Shipman isn't just a tale of crime. It's a chilling expose of how trust can be weaponized, how systemic failures can enable the unimaginable, and how one man's need for absolute control shatter hundreds of lives. On June 24th, 1998, a quiet street in Hyde would become the final stage for Shipman's most brazen act. Mrs. Kathleen Grundy, a vibrant 81-year-old former mayoress, was found dead in her armchair, fully dressed. Just hours earlier, Dr. Shipman had been in her home, and now he was at her side, signing her death certificate, stating the cause as old age. It was a common occurrence for Shipman, almost routine. He'd done it countless times before in the community, blinded by their faith in him, never questioned it. But this time, something was different. Kathleen Grundy's daughter, Angela Woodruff, a solicitor herself, was about to uncover a betrayal that would bring the doctor's monstrous deeds to light. The first hint of trouble came when Ms. Woodruff was informed that her mother had left a new will, one she had apparently drafted just a few weeks before her death, leaving her entire estate of £386,000 to Dr. Shipman. It was completely out of character for Kathleen, who had a close relationship with her family, and the document itself, while bearing her signature, was a shoddy, typed affair, full of grammatical errors and legal inconsistencies. Angela's suspicions, initially just a flicker, ignited into a full-blown fire. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Was this a tragic, sudden death, or was it a cold, calculated act of murder? Harold Shipman's journey to becoming the most prolific serial killer in modern British history didn't start in Hyde. Born in Nottingham in 1946, he was a middle child, known as Fred to his family. His early life was largely unremarkable, save for one pivotal event: the death of his mother, Vera, from lung cancer when he was just 17. He was devoted to her and was fascinated by how the doctor administered morphine could so easily alleviate her pain. Her death, while devastating, seemed to plant a seed of something darker within him, a fascination with life and death and the ultimate control of both. After a failed first attempt, he was accepted into Leeds Medical School. By 1970, he was a fully qualified physician. His career launched with a dark secret already festering beneath the surface. His first confirmed victim, according to the later inquiry, was Thomas Columbine in 1972, while Shipman was a junior doctor at Pontefract General Infirmary. He injected the 54-year-old bus driver with a fatal dose of morphine. From there, the killings continued, a quiet, almost imperceptible stream of death. But his first major red flag came in 1975, at a practice in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. He was caught forging prescriptions for large quantities of the painkiller pethidine, to which he had become addicted. The conviction was for forgery and drug possession, not murder. He was fined, underwent a period of drug rehabilitation, and, disturbingly, was not struck off the medical register. Instead, the General Medical Council allowed him to continue practicing. The system, designed to protect, had failed at its first crucial test. And so, he moved on, taking his secret with him to Hyde in 1977, where he would go on to commit the vast majority of his crimes. He was a popular doctor, known for his compassionate bedside manner and his dedication to his patients, particularly the elderly women who made up a significant portion of his practice. He would make frequent house calls, reassuring worried family members, and often being the last person to see his victims alive. The pattern was always the same: a lethal dose of morphine, an injection to the victim's arm or leg, followed by a signed death certificate attributing the cause to a sudden, natural event. He was an artist of deception, a wolf in a lab coat, and the residents of Hyde were his sheep. What made Shipman's crimes particularly horrific was their systematic and methodical nature. Unlike impulsive killers driven by passion or rage, Shipman operated with calculated precision, turning murder into a routine medical procedure. His killing method was consistently the same: He would administer a lethal dose of geomorphine, medical-grade heroin, directly into his victim's bloodstream, typically through an injection in the arm or leg. This drug choice was deliberate and calculated. Geomorphine was legally available to him as a doctor. It acted quickly, and in the quantities he used, it would cause rapid unconsciousness followed by respiratory failure and death within minutes. The victims who experienced what appeared to be a peaceful death, slipping into unconsciousness without apparent distress. To any observer, including family members who might be present, it would seem as though their loved one had simply passed away naturally. Shipman's medical authority gave him complete control over the narrative of these deaths. He would immediately pronounce the victim dead, often expressing apparent sorrow and compassion to grieving family members, before completing a death certificate that attributed the death to natural causes such as heart failure, stroke, or simply old age. The demographics of Shipman's victims reveal a chilling pattern of predatory behavior. The vast majority, approximately 80%, were elderly women, typically living alone or in circumstances where they were isolated from regular family contact. These women were particularly vulnerable because they often had multiple health conditions that could plausibly explain a sudden death, and their advanced age made natural death seem unremarkable to both families and authorities. Shipman demonstrated a predatory instinct for identifying these vulnerable targets. He would often visit patients at their homes, claiming to conduct routine checkups or follow-up visits. During these visits, he would sometimes suggest that the patient needed an injection, perhaps a painkiller, a vitamin supplement, or medication for their condition. The victims, trusting their doctor completely, would readily agree to the injection, never suspecting that it would be their last conscious act. Analysis of Shipman's crimes revealed disturbing patterns in both the timing and location of his murders. The majority of his killings occurred in the afternoon, typically between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. This timing was strategic. It allowed Shipman to complete his regular morning appointments at his surgery before making his deadly house calls, and it occurred during a time when many elderly people would be alone, as family members were at work and children were at school. The geographic distribution of the murders was concentrated heavily in Hyde and the surrounding areas, but Shipman was also responsible for deaths in neighboring communities where he had practiced or provided temporary coverage. His territory of terror extended across several postal districts, creating a pattern that would later help investigators map the full extent of his crimes. Shipman's killing frequency varied throughout his career, with some periods showing intense activity and others relatively quiet. The Shipman inquiry later determined that his murder rate accelerated significantly after he established his solo practice in Hyde in 1992. Free from the oversight of partners and able to operate with complete autonomy, Shipman's killing reached its peak in the mid-1990s. During some months, he was killing multiple patients, maintaining a facade of dedicated medical care while systematically murdering those who trusted him most. Among the 15 murders for which Shipman was ultimately convicted, each case tells a story of trust betrayed and life stolen. Beyond Kathleen Grundy, whose forge will led to his downfall, the victims included women like Irene Turner, and 67-year-old widow who called Shipman to her home complaining of feeling unwell. Within minutes of his arrival, she was dead, with Shipman certifying that she had died of a stroke. Joan Melia, 73, was another victim whose death followed the typical pattern. She had been in relatively good health when Shipman visited her at home. Family members later recalled that she had been planning activities for the following week and showed no signs of serious illness. Yet within hours of Shipman's visit, she was found dead in her chair, with the doctor attributing her death to heart failure. Winifred Meller, 73, had been chatting with neighbors about her garden just hours before Shipman's fatal visit. She had complained of a minor chest infection and was expecting a routine checkup. Instead, she received a lethal injection that ended her life within minutes. Her sudden death shocked neighbors who had seen her appearing well just hours earlier. The case of Bianca Pomfret, 49, stood out because she was younger than most of Shipman's victims. She had visited Shipman's surgery complaining of chest pains and was told to return later in the day for further examination. When she returned for her appointment, Shipman administered the fatal injection in his surgery rather than during a house call. Her death was initially attributed to coronary thrombosis, but the post-mortem examination revealed the telltale signs of geomorphine poisoning. Each victim had family members and friends who mourned their loss, accepting Shipman's explanations for their deaths because they had no reason to doubt a respected doctor's medical judgment. These families lived for years not knowing that their loved ones had been murdered, carrying the grief of what they believed were natural deaths while the killer continued his practice, earning their continued respect and trust. One of the most damning pieces of evidence against Shipman was the digital trail he left on his computer system. In an attempt to cover his tracks and make his victims' deaths appear more plausible, Shipman systematically falsified medical records after murdering his patients. Using his computer system, he would retroactively add symptoms and conditions to his victims' medical files, creating a fictional medical history that would support his death certificates. The forensic computer analysis revealed that Shipman had made numerous entries to his patients' medical records after their deaths, sometimes within hours of certifying their demise. These entries typically described symptoms of serious conditions such as chest pain, shortness of breath, or general deterioration that would make sudden death seem medically reasonable. The computer's audit trail, however, preserved timestamps that prove these entries were made after the patients had died. This digital evidence was crucial in establishing the premeditated nature of Shipman's crimes. It demonstrated that he not only planned and executed the murders, but also took deliberate steps to conceal them by manipulating medical records. The falsified entries showed a calculating mind at work, methodically constructing false medical narratives to support his lies. In some cases, Shipman's computer manipulations were extensive, adding detailed symptoms and conditions spanning weeks or months before the patient's deaths. This retroactive rewriting of medical history required intimate knowledge of medical terminology and symptom patterns, knowledge that Shipman used not to heal but to perfect his deceptions. The revelation of Shipman's crimes devastated the community of Hyde. For decades, he had been a respected and beloved figure, someone residents turned to in their most vulnerable moments. Families had entrusted him with the care of their elderly relatives, and many had been grateful for his apparent dedication and compassion during difficult times. When the truth emerged, the psychological impact on the community was profound. Residents who had praised Shipman for his caring bedside manner during their relatives' final moments now realized they had been witnessing carefully orchestrated murder scenes. Family members who had felt comfort in Shipman's presence during bereavements discovered that the man they had trusted and thanked was actually their loved one's killer. The betrayal extended beyond individual families to encompass an entire community's relationship with medical authority. Residents of Hyde and surrounding areas found themselves questioning not only Shipman, but the medical profession more broadly. If such a respected and apparently caring doctor could be a serial killer, how could they trust any medical professional? Local businesses, community organizations, and social networks were all affected by the revelation. Shipman had been involved in various community activities, and his patients had often spoken highly of him to friends and neighbors. The discovery that this pillar of the community was actually a predator created a collective trauma that would take years for the town to overcome. Following Shipman's arrest in connection with Kathleen Grundy's murder and the Forge will, police launched an unprecedented investigation that would involve the exhumation of numerous bodies and extensive forensic analysis. The investigation, led by Detective Superintendent Bernard Paussels, quickly expanded as a pattern of suspicious deaths became apparent. The exhumation process was both technically challenging and emotionally devastating for the families involved. Bodies that had been buried for months or years had to be carefully removed from their graves and subjected to detailed post-mortem examinations. In many cases, families who had long since grieved and found some measure of peace were forced to relive their loss as they learned that their loved ones had been murdered. The forensic evidence was conclusive in multiple cases. Despite the passage of time, traces of diamorphine were found in tissue samples from several victims. This was particularly significant because diamorphine, unlike naturally occurring substances, had no legitimate reason to be present in the victims' bodies unless it had been administered by injection. The pathological examinations also revealed the physical evidence of injection sites on the victims' bodies. Forensic pathologists identified small puncture wounds consistent with hypodermic needle insertion, typically in the arms or legs where Shipman had administered his lethal injections. These injection sites, combined with the presence of diamorphine, provided irrefutable evidence of murder. While Shipman was ultimately convicted for 15 murders, the Shipman Inquiry concluded that his actual victim count was far higher. Dame Janet Smith's comprehensive investigation, which examined over 600 deaths that had occurred under Shipman's care, concluded they had probably killed at least 250 patients during his career. The inquiry's findings painted a picture of a killing spree that had continued virtually unabated for over 2 decades. The murders weren't confined to his later years or periods of particular stress. They represented a consistent pattern of behavior that had begun early in his career and continued until his arrest. The inquiry identified additional victim categories beyond elderly women, including some male patients and a few individuals who were younger than typical victims. However, the overwhelming majority remained elderly women living alone, reflecting Shipman's predatory focus on the most vulnerable members of his patient population. The geographic scope of the crimes also extended beyond Hyde. The inquiry found suspicious deaths linked to Shipman's temporary assignments at other practices, his work in hospitals during his early career, and his interactions with patients in various healthcare settings. This broader pattern suggested that Shipman had been killing patients wherever he practiced medicine, adapting his methods to different environments while maintaining his core approach. The trial of Harold Shipman began on October 5, 1999, at Preston Crown Court. He was charged with the murder of 15 of his female patients and 1 count of forging Kathleen Grundy's will. The prosecution, led by Richard Henriquez QC, laid out a methodical, devastating case, presenting a timeline of death and deception. The court heard how Shipman had abused his position of trust, using his medical knowledge not to heal, but to kill. The victims were, for the most part, elderly women who trusted him completely. The families of the victims sat in the public gallery, listening in agony as the details of their loved ones' final moments were laid bare. The defense's case was weak, and Shipman himself remained stoic, even arrogant, throughout the proceedings, never showing a hint of remorse or emotion. He refused to take the stand, and in his police interviews he maintained a stony silence, denying everything and offering no explanation for his actions. The lack of a clear motive for the majority of the murders, other than the Grundy case, was a central question, and the prosecution offered a chilling possibility: that Shipman's true motive was a thrill of having the ultimate power of life and death over his patients. During the trial, the prosecution presented evidence that revealed the calculated nature of Shipman's crimes. Expert witnesses testified about the effects of gel morphine and how the doses found in the victims would have caused rapid death. The computer evidence showing Shipman's falsification of medical records was presented in detail, demonstrating his systematic attempts to cover up his crimes. The defense struggled to present a credible alternative explanation for the evidence. Shipman's lawyers attempted to argue that the deaths were natural and that the presence of gel morphine could be explained by legitimate medical treatment. However, the quantities found in the victims' bodies were far in excess of any therapeutic dose, and the pattern of deaths was too consistent to be explained by coincidence. Throughout the trial, Shipman displayed a remarkable lack of emotion or concern. Court observers noted his apparent arrogance and his dismissive attitude toward the proceedings. He seemed to regard the trial as an inconvenience rather than a reckoning for his crimes. This behavior was consistent with psychological profiles of narcissistic killers who view themselves as superior to others and beyond normal moral constraints. On January 31, 2000, after a trial that had lasted 52 days, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Harold Shipman was found guilty on all 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. As the verdicts were read, he remained impassive, his expression betraying no emotion. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on all 15 counts, with the trial judge, Mr. Justice Forbes, recommending a whole life tariff, meaning he would never be released from prison. The judge's words to Shipman were powerful and damning. Each of your victims was your patient, and you killed each and every one of your victims by a calculated and cold-blooded perversion of your medical skills. I have no doubt that each of your victims smiled and thanked you as she submitted to your deadly administrations. Yours was not a healing touch. None of them knew that it brought them death, which was disguised as the caring attention of a good doctor. The verdict was a moment of profound relief and deep sadness for the families. They had justice, but they would never get back their mothers, grandmothers, and friends. The public reaction was one of shock and betrayal. How could man so trusted, so revered, commit such heinous acts for so long? The Shipman Inquiry, a public investigation, was launched to answer that very question. Led by Dame Janet Smith, it investigated over 600 deaths certified by Shipman and concluded in 2005 that he had likely killed at least 250 of his patients, making him the most prolific serial killer in British history. The inquiry's final reports were a scathing indictment of the failures of the medical and legal systems. They revealed a litany of missed opportunities, from his initial drug conviction to botched police investigation in 1998, all of which enabled him to continue his killing spree unchecked. The aftermath of the case led to significant changes in medical practice, including new regulations on death certification and increased scrutiny of doctors' records. Harold Shipman's final chapter was as silent and solitary as his murders. On January 13, 2004, the day before his 58th birthday, he was found dead in a cell at HM Prison Wakefield, having hanged himself with a bedsheet. His suicide was seen by many as a final act of control, a refusal to ever answer for his crimes or provide the families with the closure of a confession. For the victims' families, it was yet another betrayal. They had waited for answers that would now never come. His wife, Primrose, who had stood by him throughout the trial, was left to grieve a husband she had thought she knew, but who was, in truth, a stranger, a monster. The case of Harold Shipman forced Britain to confront a chilling reality. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a stethoscope. It was a story of profound abuse of power, a man who weaponized the very essence of trust and care. His legacy is one of tragedy and a stark reminder that even the most respected members of our society can harbor the darkest of secrets. The names of his victims, Kathleen Grundy, Irene Turner, Joe Amelia, and countless others, are etched into the collective memory of the town that will never forget the doctor who brought death disguised as a cure. If you found this case as shocking as we did, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss our next upload.